Imagine a silent war fought not with weapons but with time itself, a war spanning centuries hidden beneath layers of deceit, buried so deep in history that even humanity itself had forgotten it ever began. A war where no fleets clashed. In the void, no armies stormed the gates of distant worlds, and yet it raged, in the shadows, in the whispers of forgotten texts, in the unexplained collapses of civilizations that had dared to dream too big. For humanity, the war had been invisible, but for the Galactic Federation it had been deliberate. They were an empire of 1,000 worlds, a vast and ancient coalition of species that had long abandoned the primitive brutality of conquest. They did not destroy, they did not invade, they did not need to. Instead they watched, they guided, they controlled. To the untrained eye, the Federation appeared to be a benevolent overseer, a galactic community that welcomed emerging species into its fold. But beneath the surface, beneath the carefully crafted illusion of peace, lay a cold and brutal truth. No species was allowed to rise beyond a certain threshold, not through war, not through diplomacy, not through sheer ingenuity. For eons, the Federation had perfected the art of suppression. Scientific breakthroughs were sabotaged before they could take shape. Revolutions were extinguished before they could spark. The greatest minds of countless civilizations were silenced, sometimes through subtle manipulations, sometimes through sudden and inexplicable misfortune, and for thousands of years, the system worked flawlessly. Humanity, like so many before them, had been shackled without ever knowing it. Every war, every economic collapse, every sudden technological stagnation, these were not random. They were carefully orchestrated setbacks, engineered to ensure that Earth would never breach the invisible ceiling imposed upon it. And yet, something had changed. A ripple in the grand design, a deviation, an anomaly. The year was 2274 when the Federation first detected it. At first it was nothing more than a whisper in the abyss, a faint signal lost in the background radiation of the void. It should have meant nothing, a routine anomaly, easily dismissed. But the Federation's watchers were meticulous. They traced the signal back to its origin, Earth. What they discovered sent shockwaves through the highest echelons of the Federation. Humanity had built something impossible. A fleet. Not just a collection of ships, not mere vessels for exploration or trade, but a true war fleet. A fleet designed not for defense, not for deterrence, but for something else entirely. Defiance. The very concept was unthinkable. The Federation's hidden overseers had been certain, absolutely certain, that humanity would never reach this point. The subtle manipulations, the carefully placed limitations, the unseen hands that had guided their fate, all of it should have ensured that Earth remained a harmless, docile world, forever caught in an endless cycle of progress and regression. And yet, against all logic, against all probability, the evidence was undeniable. Humanity had not been idle. They had not been as blind as the Federation had believed. For over a century, they had been preparing, in absolute secrecy, thousands of warships constructed in the void. Massive battle cruisers, hidden within the swirling storms of gas giants, shipyards carved into the frozen rock of rogue planets drifting in the abyss, research stations buried beneath the ice of Europa, the dust of Mars, the toxic clouds of Venus. And the most terrifying part, the Federation had not seen it coming. Every sensor net, every intelligence operative, every deep space probe meant to monitor Earth's progress had found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Humanity had not merely built a fleet, they had built a ghost fleet, a navy that did not exist. Ships that had never been documented, weapons that had never been recorded, a war machine developed in the shadows, from technology hidden behind layers of deception, from knowledge buried so deeply that not even the Federation's most sophisticated intelligence networks had detected it. This was not an act of desperation. This was not an accident. This was deliberate. The Federation's hidden masters convened in secrecy for the first time in millennia to discuss the unthinkable. Had humanity somehow outmaneuvered them? Had they always known? Had they spent the last century pretending to be stagnant while preparing for war? By the time the Federation realized the full extent of the anomaly, it was already too late. The fleet was ready, and humanity was waiting. The moment the Galactic Federation uncovered the truth, it was already too late. The Watchers, those ancient unseen architects of control, had always believed in their own infallibility. They had guided the rise and fall of civilizations for millennia, ensuring that no species ever upset the delicate balance of galactic power. And yet, in the year 2274, their long-standing dominion was faced with something they had never encountered before, a species that had broken free of their control. Humanity had done the impossible. They had not merely advanced, they had deceived. The Federation itself, across the vast cold expanse of the Sol system, an invisible armada had been forged in absolute secrecy. Every ship, every weapon, every technological breakthrough, hidden behind a veil of misdirection so elaborate that it bordered on the impossible. But how? How had an upstart species, barely out of its own cradle, outmaneuvered an empire that had ruled the stars for untold eons? The answer lay buried in the shadows of Earth's own past. The deception had begun long before the first ship had ever been built, before the first metal had been forged in the void, before the first blueprint had been drawn. It had begun with a lie, a grand illusion. For nearly a century, the Federation had been watching, observing Earth's development through their hidden surveillance networks. And what they saw had reassured them: a world in stagnation, wars that led to nothing, economies that collapsed and rebuilt in predictable cycles, scientific breakthroughs that never seemed to reach their full potential, a species in decline, or so it seemed. In truth, humanity had not been declining. They had been hiding. They had learned. They had studied the patterns, uncovered the manipulation, traced the invisible hand that had shaped their history. And in that moment of revelation, a decision was made. If the Federation sought to control them through deception, then they would deceive the Federation. A global conspiracy, the likes of which had never been seen before, was born. The greatest minds of Earth, scientists, engineers, military strategists, visionaries, vanished from the public eye, their work erased from history, their legacies wiped clean. To the outside world they had been lost to accidents, to misfortune, to time itself. But in reality, they had gone underground, working in secret to lay the foundations of what would become the most ambitious undertaking in human history. The construction of the fleet was an act of artful misdirection. While the world above fought meaningless wars and engaged in endless political turmoil, the real battle was being waged in the abyss, beyond the reach of prying eyes. Vast shipyards cloaked in the shadows of asteroids, research stations buried beneath the frozen crust of distant moons, hidden bases constructed within the crushing depths of gas giants, and the Federation saw none of it, because they had already been convinced that humanity was incapable of such deception. That was their mistake. For all their intelligence, for all their ancient knowledge, the Federation had never truly understood humanity. They had seen them as just another species, another civilization to be molded and controlled. They had not considered what made humanity different. They had never faced a species that thrived in the shadows, a species that had perfected the art of war, not through brute strength but through strategy, through unpredictability, through deception. For centuries, human history had been shaped by espionage, misinformation, secret wars fought in the dark, battles won not by force but by illusion. And now, that same strategy had been used against an empire that had never seen it coming. By the time the Federation's highest council grasped the full extent of what had happened, the scale of the deception became terrifyingly clear. Humanity had not merely been advancing in secret. They had been preparing for war, and now that war was inevitable. The Federation had two choices: strike first or be annihilated. The decision was made in mere hours. Across the stars, the Federation's vast military machine stirred to life. Fleets that had not been mobilized in centuries were called to arms. Warships larger than cities, powered by technologies beyond human comprehension, were prepared for deployment. The illusion of peace, which had kept the galaxy stable for untold millennia, was shattered. The extermination of Earth was no longer a question of morality. It was a necessity. The order was given. A single, unstoppable force was dispatched to Sol, an armada of 1,000 warships, led by some of the most powerful vessels the Federation had ever built. A force so overwhelming that by all logic, no species, not even one as cunning as humanity, should have been able to withstand it. And yet, as the fleet approached the outer edges of the Sol system, something happened that should have been impossible. A message, a transmission, broadcast across all channels, from a location deep within the asteroid belt. The voice that spoke was calm, controlled, devoid of fear. "We know who you are. We know what you have done, and we have been waiting." At that moment, the void itself seemed to shift. The Federation's warships, armed with weapons capable of erasing continents, suddenly found themselves surrounded. Ghostly signatures flickered into existence across their scanners. Dozens, hundreds and thousands. The fleet that was never supposed to exist had arrived, and humanity's war for survival was about to begin. For a fleeting moment, there was silence, a silence so profound that it seemed to stretch across the void itself. Oh, silence filled not with absence but with dread. The Federation's armada, a force assembled to erase humanity from existence, had just encountered something it had never prepared for. A human fleet. And not just any fleet. A fleet that should not exist. Thousands of warships emerging from the darkness like specters of vengeance. Some of them were hidden within the asteroid belt. Others drifted in the shadows of dead moons, their hulls blackened to absorb all traces of detection. But the most terrifying sight was the one that sent a ripple of unease through the commanders. Of the Federation, the fleet was already in formation. This was not a desperate last stand. This was not the panicked response of an inferior species facing extinction. This was a trap. For the first time in untold millennia, the Federation was not the hunter. It was the hunted. Aboard the bridge of the Federation's flagship, a Leviathan-class dreadnought, one of the most advanced warships in existence, the Supreme Admiral of the fleet, XenoChronicles, stood frozen in disbelief. He had commanded fleets that had crushed rebellions before they could spark. He had led campaigns that wiped entire species from existence without so much as a battle. He had seen countless civilizations fall, reduced, to nothing more than footnotes in the annals of history. And yet, as he gazed at the thousands of ships materializing from the void, for the first time in his long and storied career, he felt fear. "Impossible," he whispered. His officers, each a veteran of countless conquests, sat in stunned silence. They scanned the fleet again and again, certain that some error had been made. Perhaps the humans were using deception, generating false sensor readings to give the illusion of a force far larger than reality. But no. Every ship was real. Their hulls gleamed under the dim light of Sol, adorned with markings never before seen by alien eyes. Some bore the insignias of nations that no longer existed, relics of a past that humanity had seemingly abandoned. Others had no markings at all, black as the abyss, their designs alien even to the humans themselves. These were not warships of a fledgling species. They were predators. Then, the message came again, this time across every frequency, translated instantly into the Federation's tongue. "We see you. We know why you have come, and we will not kneel." XenoChronicles clenched his mandibles, his mind racing. This was not how it was supposed to happen. The humans were supposed to panic. They were supposed to beg, to flee. Instead, they were waiting. And then the first shot was fired. A streak of pure white light, fired from the depths of the asteroid belt, lanced across the void at incomprehensible speed. It struck the Federation's lead battleship, a vessel 3 kilometers long, its hull reinforced with quantum refractive shielding, capable of dispersing even the most advanced weaponry. And yet, in the blink of an eye, the ship vanished. No explosion. No debris. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. The bridge of the Federation flagship, erupted into chaos. Officers shouted over one another, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. A weapon capable of bypassing their most advanced defenses. It was impossible. It had to be impossible, and yet the evidence was undeniable. Then the humans spoke again. For centuries you have controlled the fates of countless worlds. You have silenced those who dared to defy you. You have shaped history to suit your empire. A pause. But you made one mistake. In the void, the human fleet began to move. Not erratically, not in fear, but with precision. Their formations were too perfect, their maneuvers too coordinated. These were not the movements of a species new to war. They had done this before. Xitharen. Cal's mind screamed in protest. How? How had they trained an entire navy in complete secrecy? How had they developed weapons that could rival the Federation's most advanced technology, unless humanity had not been preparing for war? In mere decades, unless they had been preparing for centuries. The thought was unthinkable, unimaginable, and yet the proof was right before his eyes. The second shot came faster than the first. A sleek, black warship, a human battle cruiser, opened fire. But unlike the Federation's massive, slow-moving dreadnoughts, this ship was something entirely different. It moved like a phantom, shifting through the void with unnatural speed, its weapons silent yet devastating. A dozen more Federation ships vanished in an instant. The Supreme Admiral's mandibles twitched. He had seen enough. "Return fire," he roared. The void exploded into chaos. The Federation fleet unleashed its full might, energy lances and antimatter warheads cutting through the blackness. But for every human ship they destroyed, 2 more took its place. It was like fighting shadows. Human ships blinked in and out of existence, weaving through the battle like wraiths. They did not fight like the Federation. They did not rely on brute strength, on overwhelming force. They fought like assassins, precise, calculated, unrelenting. Then came the final horror. From the farthest reaches of the Sol system, something massive emerged. A ship, if it could even be called that. It was unlike anything the Federation had ever seen. A construct of impossible scale, a warship so vast that it defied all logic, all reason. Its hull, black as the abyss, seemed to drink in the very light of the stars. Its weapons, unseen, radiated a power that sent ripples through the fabric of space itself. And then, for the first time in known history, a Federation fleet broke formation and fled. Even Xitharen, who had conquered 1,000 worlds, knew the truth. They had not come to exterminate a lesser species. They had awakened a sleeping giant, a species that had never been at peace, species that had never been under control, a species that had not just been preparing for war, but had been built for it. And now, as the full weight of humanity's vengeance came crashing down upon them, the Supreme Admiral could only whisper 3 final words. We were fools, and the war had only just begun. There was no mercy in the void. As the first Federation warships shattered under the relentless assault, the truth became undeniable. This was not a war of conquest. This was retribution. For centuries, the Galactic Federation had prided itself on its mastery over the lesser species of the cosmos. Its dominion had never been challenged. Its fleets had never known true defeat. But now, in the darkness of the Sol system, everything had changed. Humanity had done the impossible. They had not merely risen to challenge the Federation, they had outmatched them. And as the Supreme Admiral of the invasion fleet, Xitharen watched his forces crumble, he finally understood the depth of his miscalculation. "Retreat," he bellowed, his voice strained with desperation. It was an order that had never before been uttered by a fleet of the Federation, but it was already too late, because humanity had never intended to let them leave. The battlefield had been set long before the first shot was fired. The moment the Federation ships had entered the Sol system, their fate had been sealed. Humanity's war machine had not been built for open combat. It had been built for annihilation. The Federation's ships attempted to break formation, to flee into the void. But space itself turned against them. Fields of invisible mines woven into the very fabric of the battlefield detonated in precise, calculated bursts. Each explosion was not simply designed to destroy, but to cripple. to sever communication, to sow chaos. Federation warships, once the pride of the galaxy, became nothing more than trapped beasts, flailing in the dark. And then, the final blow fell. A new wave of human ships emerged from the blackness. Larger than the first, these were not the sleek assassins that had danced through the battlefield. These were juggernauts, heavily armored dreadnoughts, moving with terrifying purpose. Their weapons, silent at first, now roared to life in an onslaught of destruction. One by one, Federation warships were erased. Even the mighty Leviathan-class dreadnoughts, once thought indestructible, crumbled. XenoChronicles watched in horror as his own flagship, the most powerful vessel in the fleet, was targeted. A single human battleship broke through the remaining defensive lines. Its hull was blackened, its weapons sleek and unfamiliar. No insignia marked its surface. It was not a warship that belonged to any nation of Earth. It was something else, something ancient. And when its weapons fired, the Federation's flagship did not explode. It simply ceased to exist. XenoChronicles did not even have time to scream. His fleet, his empire's unstoppable armada, was gone. The Galactic Federation had never lost a battle until now. Far beyond the battlefield, in the EXE grand halls of the Federation's High Council, silence reigned. The message had arrived in cold, undeniable data. A fleet of 1,000 warships, one of the largest forces ever assembled, had been completely, utterly eradicated, not defeated, not repelled, destroyed. The High Chancellor of the Federation, an elder being who had overseen the rise and fall of 1,000 species, stared at the report with an expression that few had ever seen on his face. Terror. Humanity had been a mistake. They were supposed to be controlled, suppressed, guided into an existence where they would never threaten the cosmic balance. Instead, they had become something else entirely, a force that had defied fate itself. The Federation's oldest strategists, those who had witnessed the extermination of entire civilizations, spoke in hushed, fearful tones. If humanity could outmaneuver, then once they could do it again. If humanity could conceal an entire war fleet, what else had they hidden? And worst of all, if humanity could win, then what did that mean for the future of the galaxy? The Federation had always ruled with an unshakable certainty that their dominion was absolute, that their control was unbreakable, that no species could ever rise to challenge them. But humanity had not only challenged them, they had shattered the illusion of Federation supremacy, and now, across the stars, the ripple effects of that single battle began to spread. For the first time in history, other species, once thought too weak, too afraid to rise up, began to question. If humanity had fought back, could they? Rebellions, long suppressed, began to stir. Hidden factions, once too afraid to act, now saw an opportunity. Galaxy had changed, and at the center of it all stood humanity. They had not merely survived, they had become something greater, a force that could no longer be ignored, a force that had proven, beyond all doubt, that they were more than just another species to be controlled. They were something the Federation had never encountered before, a threat, a rival, a force that had broken free from fate itself. And as the Federation's leaders sat in stunned silence, watching the stars shift in ways they could no longer predict, a single, horrifying realization settled upon them. The war was not over. It had only just begun, and humanity was winning. Across the stars, an unthinkable silence settled over the galaxy. The Federation's most powerful fleet had been annihilated, erased from existence by a species they had once dismissed as insignificant. What should have been a swift extermination had instead become the greatest military disaster in recorded history, and now the Federation was exposed. For the first time in millennia, its enemies no longer cowered. For the first time, whispers of defiance spread through the empires that had long lived under its rule. And at the heart of it all, humanity stood unchallenged, the Ghost Fleet. The Battle of Sol had been a slaughter. The Federation had lost not only thousands of ships, but something far more valuable, the illusion of their invincibility. But the greatest revelation came after. The battle had ended. When the human fleet, this impossible force that had shattered the Federation's armada, vanished, not retreated, not regrouped. Vanished. Federation deep space scanners searched the system for weeks. Countless probes were deployed, desperate to track down even a single surviving vessel. They found nothing, not a trace of wreckage, no escape pods, no lingering energy signatures. It was as if the fleet had never existed. The Federation's analysts were divided. Some believed that the human ships had employed stealth technology beyond their comprehension, slipping back into the shadows of space. Others feared a more terrifying possibility, that the fleet had never truly been there at all. That humanity had not just built weapons, but something far worse. Whispers of the unseen war. The galaxy was no longer stable. Despite the Federation's desperate attempts to suppress the truth, the story of humanity's victory spread like wildfire. Civilizations that had been under the Federation's rule for centuries, species that had known nothing but fear, began to question. If humanity could fight back, what else had the Federation lied about? Rebellions, once thought impossible, erupted across the stars. The Federation was forced to deploy entire fleets not to expand, but to defend. For the first time in its history, the Federation was on the defensive, and humanity was nowhere to be found. No new transmissions, no diplomatic envoys, no demands. The entire Sol system had become silent. The last probe that entered human space sent back a single image before being destroyed, an image that sent a wave of pure dread through the Federation's leadership. It showed Earth. Or rather, where Earth should have been. The planet was still there, its continents unchanged, its oceans undisturbed, but orbiting the planet was something impossible. A structure, a Dyson shroud. A vast interwoven sphere of blackened metal, stretching out across space, covering Earth like a shell. It pulsed with energy beyond anything the Federation had ever seen. Light bent around it. Time itself seemed to distort near its edges, and the most horrifying part? There was no trace of human life, no ships, no signals, no movement, just the shroud. Watching, waiting, a revelation. Too late, panic spread through the Federation's High Council. The greatest minds of the Empire were assembled, tasked with answering one question. What had humanity become? The leading theory was chilling. Humanity had spent centuries preparing for war. But what if they had not only developed new weapons? What if they had developed something else? What if they had evolved? The fleet that had destroyed the Federation's armada, the ships that had appeared from nowhere, the impossible weapons that had torn through their defenses. What if it had all been part of something far greater, something beyond war, something beyond flesh? The Federation had assumed that humanity's strength lay in its ships, its strategies, its technology. But what if that was never their true weapon? What if the real war had never been fought with guns and warships? What if humanity had abandoned the very concept of conventional war? What if the human fleet had not vanished, but ascended? The final transmission, then came the last message, a single transmission sent across every known frequency, in every language of the galaxy. A voice, cold, distorted, inhuman, and yet unmistakably human. We are watching. The words echoed across the stars, carrying with them a weight that no empire could ignore. The Federation sought to control history, to dictate the future. A pause. But history belongs to no empire. The future belongs to no master. Silence fell across the High Council chamber as the transmission continued. For too long, the galaxy has been shackled by those who believe themselves gods. But even gods can fall. At that moment, across the galaxy, something changed. Thousands of Federation fleets scattered across the cosmos went dark, their communications severed. Their systems scrambled. Entire starbases, entire worlds lost all contact with the Federation. The Federation had assumed they had time to prepare for a second war. They were wrong. It had already begun, and humanity was already inside their walls. The last question. No one knew where the humans had gone. No one knew what had become of them. Some whispered that they had simply vanished, fading into the fabric of the universe itself. Others believed They had evolved into something beyond physical form, intelligences that now watched over the galaxy, unseen, untouchable. But the most terrifying theory, that they were still here, among us, inside our systems, waiting, watching, and when the time was right, they would return. Not as conquerors, not as soldiers, but as something else entirely. Something the galaxy had never seen before. Something beyond war, beyond control, beyond fear. And when that day came, one final truth would be revealed. Humanity had never been fighting for survival. They had been fighting for something much greater. Freedom, and now they had it, at any cost. The final words of the transmission. You tried to erase us. You tried to enslave us. You tried to control our destiny. A pause. You failed. The transmission cut to black, and the galaxy was never the same again.